For this webinar, it's one of our most popular topics, and this again is on ASE Section 609 update and new developments in vehicle AC service. So during this session, we've broken it out into several chunks here as capably as we could anyway. And so we're going to look at a little bit on refrigerants. We'll do a refrigerant review, and we've got some service notes, things worthy of mention in that regard. None of this, of course, happens without EPA rules and actions, so we'll get into that a little bit. And then we will also talk about the Section 609 program update and also the little bit of insight into the future of heavy-duty air conditioning. So real quickly, I just want to take a look at and show where we came from in terms of where refrigerants stand today. You know, the industry initially transitioned away from R12 because of its ozone depleting properties. And although global warming potential wasn't really a policy directive way back then, R12 still had an extremely high global warming potential as well. The transition to R134A was completed by 1994 model year, and although not an ozone depleter, it has a high GWP in contrast to the ceiling number of 150, which was established by the Mobile Air Conditioning Directive in the European Union. This directive became a mandate in Europe on January 1, 2017, meaning that automakers there have to use a refrigerant with a GWP lower than 150. This served as the catalyst of refrigerant change towards low GWP refrigerants and was the beginning of the activities we see today. The US EPA, on the other hand, took a little bit more of an incentive-based approach on this issue and implemented carbon dioxide credits to meet greenhouse gas regulations. The use of a low GWP refrigerant, AC system leak reduction, and AC efficiency improvements can all provide credits for the automotive manufacturer towards meeting the new lower CO2 requirements. As a result, three refrigerants have really emerged as potentials with GWPs less than 150, and they are R152A, R1234YF, and R744, also known as CO2 or carbon dioxide. All of these have to be used according to EPA SNAP use conditions, which SNAP stands for Significant New Alternatives Policy, and all of these refrigerants, these three that have emerged, can only be used in new systems. That is, they can't be put into a system previously filled with a different refrigerant. So R152A may not have heard much about that, and that's because it really hasn't been used much, and it has a moderate flammability traits. So the way it's currently been approved for use is in what they call a secondary loop system, which means that the refrigerant can't really enter the passenger compartment. It has to be done through a chiller system where the refrigerant cools a chiller, you know, and it runs like a glycol-based coolant through it, and it will then run that cooled fluid up through the passenger compartment instead of the refrigerant through a evaporator type of situation. R744, widely used in commercial refrigeration, requires pressures around 10 times greater than current systems, so significant system re-engineering is needed. We'll talk a little bit more about R744 in a bit. R1234YF emerges as the most logical alternative to R134A, given its low GWP and similar pressure-temperature relationship to R134A. This is why virtually all manufacturers are transitioning to R1234YF refrigerant. So as you can see in this simple chart, the car has grown dramatically since 2014 when it showed 4 vehicles being used to now anticipated to being 50 million by the end of the year. Now this is of course a bit of an approximation, as you know, manufacturers are converting their vehicle fleets over, many of them, to have them completed by 2017. Now, we're not going to provide a chart of specific makes and models as it's changing just by the moment. So if we were to have it up tonight, tomorrow it would be out of date. But to give you an idea of the timing and diversity of applications, one manufacturer had R1234YF in only one of its models at the beginning of this year, while another had it in all of its vehicles. By the end of 2017, again, most all manufacturers will be using YF, which is, I'm going to kind of just refer to it as that shortly tonight at times. But when I say YF, I mean R1234YF. So let's take a look a little bit at the status with it. Cylinders per SAE standards and things through the Air Conditioning and Refrigeration Institute have to have markings so that they're clearly known to what type of refrigerant in it. So in the case of 1234, it's a white cylinder with a red band on it, the red denoting that it's got a flammable nature to it. And 1234 does have a mild flammable trait to it, and that's why it's marked as such. Also on the screen there, you see a smaller can, a 12-ounce can, which has just recently been released. I don't know that they are yet on the market, but the can size has been released. So we've got a unique tank fitting, and that's another thing that the standards have to establish so that there's not the possibility of hooking equipment up to the wrong type of refrigerant. So it's got a unique left-hand thread with 1/2" 16 Acme type thread. Of course, vehicle service fittings, like any other refrigerant, have to be unique, and they have to be dedicated towards a certain refrigerant. And just so everyone knows, it's not okay to tamper with service fittings, put adapters on for different refrigerants, and mix and match. Those are not to be touched. They're meant to be affixed permanently as a dedicated set of fittings for that specific refrigerant. Now at this point in time, of course, 1234 is not cheap. Per Fiat Chrysler, current list price is going for $10.60 an ounce, or nearly $1,700 for that 10-pound cylinder. Now, this number, of course, is expressed during what I would consider the infancy of production. Honeywell and DuPont, which is now actually a different name of the company, is called Chemours. They've changed that name. Anyway, it was a joint development partnership to begin with. So Honeywell is manufacturing 1234, and also Chemours is manufacturing 1234. In fact, Chemours has just broken ground on its third plant somewhere near Corpus Christi, Texas. And I believe what we're going to see is, as the manufacture starts to increase, if all the laws of supply and demand dictate, then we should start to see the price of this start to drop down. Even though on the screen you're seeing again the 10-pound cylinder and a 12-ounce, there's nothing that says that other sizes aren't possible. So we may someday see a 30-pound cylinder similar like we've seen with 134. And once again, manufacturing is increasing. One thing I just want to mention too is that in this new age of vehicle air conditioning, we're not looking at systems that hold 3 pounds of refrigerant. I mean, some of these are roughly around a pound, and so just the amount of refrigerant they take is less than what we're accustomed to in the past. So what about R134A? Well, unlike R12, if you remember that when we made that transition to 134, that was really a phase out, basically to stop using that chemical altogether. And with 134, it's more of a gradual phase down. So it's really going to be around for a good while yet. In fact, I would just say that, for the foreseeable future, it really is still going to be a 134A service world. Now, per EPA, they ruled on this. Cars for the United States market will no longer be able to use 134A refrigerant by the model 2021, or model 2021 year, for a factory fill at least, but that doesn't mean that they can't get 134 to service it. So you don't need to worry about that. We will probably see the price of 134 start to go up, kind of a teeter-totter thing here, where 134 will go up and 1234 shall eventually drop again because of the manufacturing numbers increasing. So we're, again, 134 is going to be around for a good while yet, so it's not going anywhere. The manufacturers can still use 134 in cars for a few years longer that are destined for what they call narrow use markets, and those are developing countries. But as far as the US, that's going to be at 2021 for 134. So right now, 134 also has some market issues that are going on, and they really stem from increased concern over imported 134 containing R40 and other blends of unknown refrigerants that have been causing problems here in the U.S. So a tariff was imposed, and you can see a pretty strict one, over 200%, for this Chinese so-called R134 that's been coming in the U.S. So prices are escalating based off of that. There've also been a few other conditions with manufacturing capabilities that have created a little bit of a shortfall in production that have caused the price to spike a bit. And you know, because of this increased concern over this, you know, contaminated, mixed, and unknown blends, these rogue blends of so-called 134 that are coming in, you know, refrigerant identification equipment has really never been more important than it is right now. It's absolutely essential to determine cylinder contents and also what's in a system that, you know, you may potentially service. All right, so let's talk just now a little bit about carbon dioxide, CO2, R744, all interchangeable with one another. So first of all, R744 is not, you know, some kind of crazy whacked out kind of thing that, you know, has been just invented, you know, and tried. I mean, it's been around in commercial air conditioning for years, and it is acceptable, has an acceptable status by EPA. Our refrigerant program includes coverage of it, its characteristics, things like that, its pressures, so on and so forth, fitting sizes. At this time, Mercedes-Benz is going to manufacture vehicles for the 27 model year in the S&E class using CO2, and they claim that the rest of their models will eventually get CO2, but for the time being, until they're able to convert those others over, they're going to be using 1234YF. At this time, I know of no information that says any of these models will reach the US. That can change. Just like I said earlier, you know, if we put up a list of 1234 cars, that would be outdated tomorrow. It's really hard to know exactly what Mercedes may do with those. But at this time, I know that they're not destined for this market. And as you can see, there's no standards yet established for service, and equipment is limited to Europe at this time. There's a lot of work, research, so on and so forth that goes into potential safety issues, fittings like we mentioned before, a lot of other compatibility issues, safety of equipment, and all of that that would need to be put in place before these vehicles were ever, you know, if they were to come here. So I'm not saying that they won't. I just know that, you know, for the short term, I think the answer to that is no. One of the inherent design features that that's in 1234 systems is the use of a internal heat exchanger. It's basically a line within a line that allows heat exchange between low temperature refrigerant and high temperature refrigerant. And really what it does, using this coaxial type of design, is it actually causes a little bit of an increase in efficiency, because typically 1234 systems lose somewhere around 5 to 8%. They're not quite as efficient as a 134 system. So with this, they're able to make that back. Now, these have been used to some degree on 134 systems for extra efficiency, but it's really a design feature now that's going to be inherent to 1234 systems. And it's too early to tell at this point, but who knows, IHX diagnosis of this certain line or how it might affect things going into the future, it could be a potential, you know, troubleshooting scenario with this new line design. One thing that's come really into focus now with these smaller systems is system charge accuracy. So don't know how long you've been working in this industry, but you know, I can certainly remember, and many people can remember, that, you know, topping off an air conditioning system, dropping, you know, maybe a pound of refrigerant in it, or half a pound of refrigerant routinely just to get it to cool better was a commonplace thing. Well, really, that's kind of hard to do anymore, because if you look at what you see on the screen here, that an old, like a mid-80s Cadillac with 56 ounces of R12 refrigerant in it, a 2-ounce charge error is, 4%. That's not such a big deal. But now when you put it in a newer system that maybe has only 12 ounces in it, somewhere around in there, you're looking at a charge error of around 17%. You can bet that starts to make a difference in the thermal efficiency of that ASE system. So really get ready for this. Start to look at these systems in a different light, because even though they do have smaller charge amounts, they also are sealed better than those older systems that we mentioned earlier. We're talking about captive seals, a lot of things that really make these systems much more tight than anything we've ever experienced before. And that feature actually of sealing that system tighter is something that a manufacturer can get credits for as far as the greenhouse gases go. So it's kind of critical. It's good for the owner of the vehicle because it's less ASE maintenance. For you, it means that you've got to be much more precise in what you do, and guessing by golly just isn't going to get it done anymore. And then also I just want to mention that chemicals that are added to over-the-counter small containers can be difficult to identify and may contaminate equipment. They can contribute to swelling of seals in compressors and cause other problems. And there are a lot of these that are on the market, so it's something to be aware of when you're thinking about servicing a system you may not have seen before that has maybe a quirky past in terms of its service and what's been done to it. Okay, a little bit about 1234 compressor oil. So all 1234 vehicles require a new type of oil, okay? So you can use 1234 YF oil in a 134 system, so that's backwards compatible in that respect. But you can't use a 134 PAG oil into a 1234 system because they lack the acid reducer. So keep that in mind. And then also, some compressors have their own unique requirements above and beyond just the fact that it might be a PAG oil. So there might be a specific subset. So it's always best to check with the manufacturer to see what their recommendation is. Of course, with hybrids, because of the insulating capabilities, POE type oils are the recommended application there. And just like with refrigerant, exact measurement of oil is, again, a precision type of operation on these smaller charge systems. So, where you routinely used to just dump oil in a system when you replace a certain component isn't really the way to do it anymore. (1234) YF equipment for refrigerant recovery and recycling is supposed to meet SAE J2843. And there were some equipment that went out and met the early version of J2843. But the problem with it was that if the refrigerant was contaminated, it wouldn't block, the machine that is, wouldn't block the recovery of that refrigerant. So if you're looking at machines and you're shopping them, you may want to talk to your equipment rep about this to make sure that your equipment meets the latest standards. Can't emphasize that enough. One tool you might want to use when looking at equipment is the SAE Mac Manufacturer Database. It's a great online resource to find mobile air conditioning component and equipment manufacturers, testing facilities, and providers of technical training that comply with appropriate standards. And you see in this particular application, ASE Section 609 program has met SAE standard J2845 for technician training for service and containment of refrigerants used in mobile AC systems. And you can see when that particular compliance expires. So the same thing you can do, you can drop in the name of the equipment in a search box, and you can go by equipment name, so on and so forth. It kind of speaks for itself, but you can see, and then all of the reference standards that most of the air conditioning and recovery and recycling business all deals with are all listed over on the right. So it's a great resource. It doesn't get published enough, and that's found at macdb.sae.org. And we've also included, if you look on your little control panel here as an attendee, you will see that there's a list of resources there, and we've got that URL listed in there for you. Before I go any further, I'm going to go over to Dan. I'm just going to ask, is there anything going on in the chat windows, or anybody's got a hand up anywhere that we may want to consider a question before we proceed?
Dave, I think we should drop the hands and let them put them back up, because many were still up from the initial hit when we first started and asked if they were there. And there's some technical questions that we really can't answer about some of the system operation and the like.
Yeah, right.
So if you don't mind, I'll put all the hands down and then let's try it again. Here we go. So if anyone has a question, go ahead and raise your hand or type into the questions pane, and we'll take those then. Dave, if you want, if you scroll down through the attendees to the E section, there's some in the C, D, and E section of the attendee list. So one of the questions, before you pop somebody in there, one of the questions is about the new refrigerant, whether or not it's on the existing ASE student and professional credentials. We have a student certification product as well as our professional level ASE tests, and there currently are no ASE questions related to the 1, 2, 3, 4 YF. The focus on technology on all of the ASE tests is the sweet spot is between 5 and 10 years old. So technology that's addressed on the ASE exam should be prevalent on automobiles, light trucks, medium heavy trucks, school bus, transit buses, and the like, for vehicles that are between 5 and 10 years old. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was going to mention, Dan, that my listing of attendees is not alphabetized, so they're all mixed up. So that doesn't help me at all trying to find them. But I would just say, if you don't mind, go ahead and just select somebody and you can call them out, and then enable their mic if they're able to do it.
Sure. I'll grab the first one I can see. Okay, so Clint, we're going to open your mic up here. I'm going to select you. There you go. You're self-muted, so you can unmute, and then you're good to go.
Okay, how do you measure the oil? How fine do you measure the oil?
Those type of technical questions are probably not something we're going to be able to answer for you. However, if the 1, 2, 3, 4 YF machinery and the specifications, Dave, I think from that conference I was at, Peter Cole was there from Neutronics, and he explained that the machines do have the same style or types or similar types of oil measurement system as they're conducting the service of the reclaiming of the refrigerant off the vehicles. They measure or capture the oil, and then you can measure that and go from there. But they are very, very sensitive to the oil amounts.
You mentioned that, but when you have a front end hit with the condenser blown up, you can't capture how much oil it lost.
Right.
How do you put so much in there then? Or you don't put oil in?
I think what you would be doing, not trying to give repair advice, but I think consulting manufacturer service information for that type of repair is probably the best step.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Clint.
Yeah, because the bottom line is about this much or about that much isn't going to work anymore. I mean, we've got to measure to the exact amount. So that's what I've been hearing is that unless you absolutely know you have exactly what the amount is recommended by the manufacturer in that system, then don't assume that it's okay that you added several ounces for this component or that component. That isn't going to get it done. I've also heard cautions about using oil injection guns because of imbalance to where it puts the oil in the system. So I'm not going to recommend anything general on what to do. I would just say that you really got to go by the book on this stuff now, or otherwise you can get yourself in trouble and get comebacks.
Dave, let's take a listen. I'm going to open up your mic, Freddie. If you would unmute your mic, and then if you have something to ask, you go right ahead.
Yes, good evening. My question is, I know you had mentioned that it kind of, with the new refrigerant coming in, it won't completely eliminate R134, but is the plan in the future, is it to completely eliminate it? Like, is the plan, the question is it in the future, is the plan is to completely, have depletion of R134A because of the new refrigerant? Is that the plan for the future, or for now it's just something that's in the air, or that they're just talking about, or they're, you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, so here's the way I think I'd understand it is that in a more severe example, when R12 was phased out, okay, R12 basically went away. There's no more cars manufactured with it, roughly 1994 model year, but R12 continued to be made for a number of years. There's still R12 around, and there's still people that use R12 for classic cars and such, and they insist on it. So there's very few vehicles that have R12 still in them and people using it at an exorbitant price. As time goes on, once we get to just, again, picking that 2021 window, once we get there, and they're not making cars with 134 as a factory fill anymore, then you're not going to be using 134 in service. You're going to be using 1234 if that's what it has as its fill. So going forward, you're going to start to see just an overall reduction in the vehicle fleet. So that's how that's going to be handled. But meanwhile, 134 will continue to be manufactured, although as the years progress.
Muted. Unmuted.
So that's how I think that's going to be handled. And Dan, I'm not sure if I was talking over somebody here or not. I know I was getting some bleed through from somebody else.
All right, so I'm sorry, Dave, I muted many of them. Let's go to Casey. I've unmuted your mic, Casey, so.
Woohoo! Hi guys, how you doing?
Good to hear you.
So you mentioned that some of the pressures were a little bit different. Do you have any, could you narrow that down a little bit?
Well, as far as 134 and 1234, the pressures are almost identical. I mean, they're slightly different at best. I mean, they almost have identical, pressure temperature relationships. So that's a big reason that we went to it. When you get to CO2 744, now that's like 10 times the pressures of what we're dealing with in 1234 and 134 systems.
Well, the 744 is only in Europe, so my question really pertains to the 1234 YF. You talking about identical, or you mean like just a few PSI?
Yeah, basically, I mean, if you were to look at a curve of both of them superimposed on one another, you see they almost behave identically. That 5 to 8% efficiency difference I was talking about earlier that's offset by the internal heat exchanger is kind of it. But if you were to impose the graph, there's a blue and a red graph. I could probably see if I could dig it up, and in some of the materials by, I think it's Chemours, they'll show you that as far as the performance.
Do you mind if I ask one more question?
Go ahead.
How is diagnosing this any different from 134A?
Diagnosis isn't much different with it. I mean, some of the compressors that manufacturers are using actually will work on a 134 and a 1234 system, you know, if that's any indication as far as what it goes. You're still going to be looking at system pressures, that sort of thing. I can tell you one thing that is a difference, though, when you're looking at these is that if you do have an evaporator issue, the evaporator that's supposed to go in a 1234 car is specifically designed, it's more robust than what's been used in the past. It's got different type of connections on it, and it meets a specific SAE standard J2842, which spells out these kind of things. I think it's even got an antimicrobial type of coating on it as well, but it's a more sturdy evaporator in kind of simple terms.
Dave, I'm going to unmute Christopher's microphone. Christopher, you're up. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Great. I'm an automotive technologies instructor, and I have my students get EPA 609 certified once a year, my level 3 students. My question, I guess, and I'm sorry if I missed it, when exactly will you guys be including questions regarding YF servicing on the EPA 609?
In general, we don't call out the refrigerant on the ASE tests. So I would say that, but again, repeat that the test content is prevalent to technology, is about technology that's prevalent on vehicles that are between 5 and 10 years old. Okay, so it's at that, from that, it's pretty obvious that you won't see that on a test now. There's way too few vehicles, too many vehicles still running the 1234 YF or 134. Pardon me. Thank you, Chris.
But as
Sure.
far as our 609 program goes, we've had it on our program since the beginning of 2015 with the 2015 version. So
okay, see that's what I was more referring to, not the actual ASE for air conditioning, but for the 609 certification.
Right. So our 609 program, starting in February of 2015, it started to include 1234 YF, R744, and R152A, including the handling, health and safety issues, equipment stuff like J2843 standards, and all the other related stuff that's required of us by the federal government.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some of the differences in the system, at the component level, the line, stuff like that, those are questions better answered in an air conditioning technology update class, specifically by folks that do that, the training instructors that you would see from many of the manufacturers, the aftermarket, such as maybe Standard Motor Products, the folks that from the parts store level, those type of folks would be able to present that much better job of that. The other thing too, Dave, I want to point out is that for the section 608 systems, one of the I just made a statement for Ross. He had asked a question. I misread what his question was, and the question's pain. He said that he had a 608, and that is ASE cert for AC systems, and he has been told that's all I need to be able to service heavy-duty truck AC systems, and that is correct, right? He could, with a 608 and an AC certification of a 609, not the ASE professional credential, that you can service both the refrigerant system on the cab for the the passenger or occupant compartment, as well as the refrigerant system on the trailer, correct?
My answer to that is I think so, and here's why I say I think so, because first of all, when somebody says they have a 608, it doesn't mean anything because there's 4 separate types. There's type 1 through type 4. Now, I don't know if he's got a universal or if he's got a type 2 or what part of the heavy-duty truck AC system he's working on, because I don't know if you're working on the trailer, if you're working on the trailer in the back, you know.
Yeah,
go ahead.
jumped back in and he said, just to confirm, I don't need 609 to service semi-truck cab system. He needs a 609 to service the semi-truck cab system if it's 134, right?
He can also use a Type 2 608, but it's
Okay.
usually easier to use a 609.
Yep. So he's solid. He said that he has a core Type 1 and Type 2. So
he's in good shape. Yep.
So again, I just want to make a statement. Somebody asked about flammability. I was at a conference this past weekend. The TST folks had their big event up in New York, and Peter Cole did a presentation. He's the gentleman that did a webinar for us a little while back, and he was speaking to flammability. And I don't have my notes right in front of me, but he listed a bunch of flammable liquids that 134A is less flammable than. And the last thing that he discussed about flammability really shocked me, because it is not that flammable. It's much less flammable than engine oil, power steering fluid, I think he said brake fluid. So you get an idea that this is not really as flammable as, it has a flammability, but it's not that huge. So anyway, he was pointing out, don't get too panicky about that. I think you did that same thing for us in our webinar.
Yeah, Dan, that's absolutely true. In fact, it's last on the list of flammability of anything that's really on a car. I've actually seen it, pure straight 1234 held up to a torch, and it will not sustain a flame. I mean, you have to keep putting it on there under pressure in order for it to even, have any flame at all. So it won't keep burning.
Yep. One of the things too to consider, I think the one that was shocking was windshield washer fluid. It's less flammable than windshield washer fluid. So that says something. You have methanol in many of those, correct? So in that mixture. So that's interesting, right?
It is interesting. It is, because I think it got, that was part of the situation that happened back a couple years ago when there was this flammability concern that came out of Europe, and at that point then there was already what they call a cooperative research panel that was put together by SAE with all the manufacturers on it, and they went back, they did another one. So I mean, the safety testing for this thing is pretty extensive, and I'm just saying from what I know, I don't have a dog, in this hunt at all as far as which refrigerant prevails. I think the most logical one will prevail, and which one seems to fit the best. And right now we're going through a transition, so obviously there's just a lot of questions, concerns, because it's new, and costs that are involved.
Yeah, and we're so new in this, so your questions in the question pane about retrofitting and the like, that's something that's going to happen through industry. That's, as the 134A is spooled down for production, it will become less available. And then what approach will there be for those systems? There's no, it's going to be a long ways away before 134A is not available to the market. So. Correct,
Dan,
Dave?
Yeah, Dan, there's one thing I just want to mention real quicker, because I'm looking at the pane right now as far as some of the questions coming in here on these refrigerants, and make one thing absolutely clear right now: there will never be retrofits of 134 to 1234. That isn't going to happen. They're going to be around long enough, and they're going to time out. That isn't going to happen, and so you can't put 134 in a 1234, and you can't put 1234 in a 134. So either way, it doesn't work. You can't do it. By law, anyway.
Yep, and the dyes may be specific for 1234YF. Again, those are technical questions, more designed for an update class as to air conditioning technology specific to the systems that are on the vehicles. So that's important. So just keep that in mind. Let's pop it open, Dave. I'm gonna I think the person's name is Derek. So your microphone's open. You've been waiting for a while. You still available? You still have your hand up. If you'd unmute your microphone and give it a shot, otherwise I'm going to move on. Okay, you put your hand down. I'm going to move you down. All right. And then we'll go to EJ. You're open.
Hello?
Yep, there you go.
Okay. Hey, I have more of a comment than a question for that person that was talking about checking the oil, the amount of oil. I work for a GM dealership, Cadillac, and when this system came out, Robin Air sent us some equipment. And basically what you do is you have to have a Wi-Fi connection that you go to SI, General Motors. Then you hook the machine up to a DLC connector in the car, and it comes up with a database. And it tells you everything that this car has, the amount of fluids, and if it shows the pressures when the hoses are on there, it'll tell you what it believes the car is doing. And that's basically all I had to say. I mean, it's pretty easy.
Thanks for that comment.
All right. Thank you. Dave, I'm going to drop down here too and hit another one. Kenneth. I've unmuted your mic, Kenneth. You've had your hand up for a while. If you want to pop on there, that'd be great. Give him just a second more. All right, I'm going to turn your mic off and then put your hand down. All right, and then I'll grab Sergey. Your mic's on. You had a question for us? There you go.
What is the new free 234 is the technician that will be certified as it was on the 12 ones?
I kind of got a little bit about R12. There's a lot of echo behind you. I don't know if you have a speakerphone on too going. I'm gonna move on if it's not gonna work. Is that okay, Dave? Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that.
Move on there. All right, and then I had Thomas. Thomas, your microphone's open here, and if you just turn it on your side, you'll be good to go. Thomas with a last name starting in A. All right, I'm going to move him on.
Maybe let's do one more, Dan, and then I'll go on with the rest of what we've got. I saw a couple questions about HD market and HD systems and so on and so forth, and I am going to get to that.
All right, so let's grab Ted. Ted, your microphone's open. No, not working there. Go ahead, Dave. Let's move on. And I'll put the hands down and we'll start again.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dave.
So let's get on to the EPA regulation part of tonight's presentation. So a couple things have happened. I know it's saying July 2015. It seems like a long time ago, but a lot of this has really just started to come effective. So as part of EPA's final Rule 20, they listed as unacceptable starting in model year 2021, and we talked a little bit about that tonight already, is that new light-duty vehicles are not going to be able to use 134 refrigerant anymore. We mentioned the narrowed use limits, that'll go on a little further through 2025, and it's limited to vehicles exported to countries lacking infrastructure. But again, that doesn't apply to the U.S. on those narrow use type things. And then it changes the status of several HFC and HCFC refrigerant blends to unacceptable as of model year 2017, and this is reflected in the refrigerant charts on the EPA website as well as in our booklet for new light duty vehicles only, and also use of 134 and refrigerant blends. Okay, now let's move to something a little bit more recent. In December 2016, EPA issued its final Rule 21. And essentially what this comes down to is that 1234 is now acceptable for use in limited heavy duty vehicle types, MDPVs, pickup trucks, HD vans. That's effective January 3rd of this year. And this is not big, like Class 7 trucks. This is, for the heavy duty in those particular classifications with a GVWR of 8501 through 14,000, classes 2B and 3. So that's that. Pretty straightforward. Now, some notes on motor vehicle air conditioning service that I'd really like you to take notice of. If you didn't come tonight for any other reason, please pay attention to this stuff right here on the screen. So all of the EPA SNAP listings talk about MVAC refrigerants and the use of unique fittings, okay? They are unique, and that means unique means they don't change to something else if you decide to work on something else. They have to be permanently attached. So again, changing it, putting an adapter, modifying a fitting in any way, it violates those use conditions, and you could be held accountable for that if you were caught mixing refrigerants as a result of it or contributing to some sort of mixing refrigerant. Now, getting into a little bit more interesting category under the Clean Air Act Title II tampering restrictions is that when the manufacturers went ahead and certified their cars, when they used 1234, if they got light-duty greenhouse gas compliance credits for it, that means if you were to mess with that air conditioning system and put, like 134 in it, which as I mentioned earlier, you should not do, you would be tampering with what's considered in federal eyes as an emission-related component under Clean Air Act Title II. So kind of serious stuff. You're touching air conditioning, but because it was used to help it gain certification, you're really touching an emissions component. So kind of be aware of your surroundings and know, what governs this kind of stuff, because it's just not worth it. I know people say that maybe EPA doesn't go around and police much, but do you want to be the one that finds out that they do? I mean, I just don't think it's worth it. And here's another big one that's highlighted here. So starting in January 1, we're going to see a sales restriction go into place like we used to have for R12. Okay, we haven't seen that for some time now, but that is going to go into effect. You'll need to show your Section 609 credentials to buy it. And then record keeping will be the usual business like it used to be, where the seller of that refrigerant has to, note who they sold it to and when and so on and so forth in their credential. Okay, federal law does have an exemption in it for cans less than 2 pounds that have a self-sealing valve, such as they were using in California. I'm mentioning that just as a asterisk to this. I know some people are not happy about that, but that is really the situation. So that's kind of the, in a nutshell, that's the law. So maybe some of you haven't really thought that a 609 credential has been really all that worthwhile as of late. You get by without it and kind of complacent and all that. But if you're going to buy refrigerant, you got to have it. So you either may want to get a 609 credential, and we're happy to help you out with that, or you may want to get your credentials duplicated, and we can help you out with that too. So be aware. So just to clarify a little bit on 609 or 608, they overlap a little bit. Okay, so obviously on the left, we're looking at passenger cars as a 609. Okay, buses, if it has, R22 in it, then it's certainly 608, and R22 is gone. Trucks, if it has, an air conditioning system that's substantially identical to what's in a passenger car, that can be a 609 application. And then we have these off-road vehicles, which also can be a 609 application considered as an MVAC-like appliance by EPA. But 609 doesn't apply to trains, planes, helicopters, refrigerated trailers, and boats, and that sort of stuff. So generally what I tell people is if the air conditioning system has the same job of cooling occupants and, in their cabin, then you're pretty much, good to go with it as a 609. Dan touched on this earlier. I'd like to clarify it even further here. If you have ASE heating and air conditioning credentials, whether it's an A7 Auto Series, H7 in transit, T7 for truck, S7 for school bus, none of those equal 609. So the 609 product is intended to be just what we talked about here for the bulk of this particular session. Is it deals with safe handling, and responsible handling of refrigerants used in motor vehicle air conditioning systems, and that's really what it's all about. Okay, so what's new in our program? Well, our big revision was in 2015. I mentioned that earlier with one of the callers. And then as these laws have changed and they've crept out little by little, just as you've seen, we've added some minor revisions in 2016, and we've got another one going in place right now in 2017 to include the essence of rules 20 and 21 that we already talked about. We have updated refrigerant status charts in there because obviously those rules affect them, and a notification of the sales restriction that we just talked about. Again, January 1 of 2018, got to have a 609 credential for the purchase of 609, and you got to have one anyway to work on a motor vehicle air conditioning under federal law. So our program is available. Easiest way is online at our learning management system site at asecampus.com. You get an instant credential online. That's good for 60 days, and then we will send you a permanent credential by mail in that time. We also have a voucher program, which are electronic coupon credits that you can buy in bulk, which is kind of a real handy thing that we see with employers, some government agencies, and so on and so forth. You can also get a printed booklet where you can request it at ase.com/CFC, and the cost is $19 per candidate. All right, let's switch gears, and I just want to give a quick update on the heavy-duty market because I saw in the questions pane people asking, when's it coming here, and so on and so forth, and it's questions we get quite often. So Chemours is one of the manufacturers of 1234YF, started a risk assessment for the HD market, but they don't have a manufacturer testing partner. That would be like one of the truck companies, so on and so forth. And the reason they have to do a risk assessment is for safety reasons. They have to document what happens when a given volume of 1234 would penetrate the cabin and build up to certain concentrations. That all has to be on file for safety reasons. Once that's done, it takes another, as long as 4 years for a changeover for refrigerant transition to occur. So that means that we're probably not looking at anything before 2023 with the way things stand. Some of the first steps that are being discussed right now in the industry of developing ASE leak standards for the HD market. So in other words, the first step being is instead of worrying about changing altogether with a different refrigerant, how about minimizing leakage from the 134 that's the prevalent refrigerant right now? And again, that's going to be used for some time in this market. Now, you see mention of SAE J2727. That's an SAE standard that establishes norms for leakage from light-duty passenger vehicles into atmosphere, and different entities have put an emphasis on that particular standard. For example, the state of Minnesota uses J2727 as far as compliance for the sale of new cars, where a manufacturer has to testify that their vehicle meets those normal emission levels. So we may see something like that as a first step before we go to an altogether change in refrigerants. So, and then when we look at the EPA, it doesn't currently have any greenhouse gas incentives in its plans for HD, and that means to switch over refrigerants. However, the California Air Resources Board, they are working on greenhouse gas incentives to coincide with what's called EPA Phase 2. So without getting too much in the weeds here on regulations, there's a Phase 1 and a Phase 2 that pretty much work in a parallel path between the US EPA and the state of California with CARB. So as we move towards the adoption of what they call the Phase 2 part of it, CARB may go one measure further than what EPA is doing by actually giving truck manufacturers an incentive if they were to switch to a low greenhouse gas or low GWP rather refrigerant. So that's nothing in stone on that one. That could be a future direction, and we'll try to keep our eyes on that and keep you updated if it moves that way. That's pretty much it on that. So with that, that's pretty much the guts of the presentation that I had. And Dan, I don't know if we've got others in any trends in any of the questions we're seeing.
Dave, I think you should just spend a minute. I know we can't really talk about this for the reasons why, but spend a minute because there's some concern about the 2-pound cans or the less than 2 pounds, smaller than 2 pound cans and DIY issues. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to it. I sure can. I'm sure it's causing some concern out there, and that's been an issue. It's been discussed in different forums throughout the industry. Hasn't sat well with people. But here's what I'm just going to say about it a little bit, and something to keep in mind, because there's two elements of that 2-pound can. I mean, sure, it enables a DIYer to do their job. But remember that when somebody goes and buys that smaller cylinder, it's predicated on history of topping off an air conditioning system, which again, with these systems being much tighter, better designed, may not be the problem whatsoever. It might not even be low on refrigerant. It could be a a control system problem, pressure switch, so on and so forth. It may even have air conditioning problem, could be tied into the mill light being on, that shared data is causing the ASE system to shut down because something isn't right. All those sorts of things. Unfortunately, what it means, on your end, being in the professional repair trade, is that the DIY cans, which have already been out there before, so we have to remember that, okay, those have been out there before, and again, 134 is going to be around for some time. Those are still going to probably continue to contribute to people topping off, because they're not going to be aware of this. And also, when they buy many of those cans, they have a lot of dyes and they have sealants in them, which cause other system problems. So, if you get a machine, or I'm sorry, if you get a vehicle that comes in and somebody says, oh, I've got this problem with my AC system, you've never seen the car, they just want to steer clear of it. That's really about the only advice I can give you on it. It's one of those consumer choice issues, I guess, that won out. It does seem to conflict with the direction of, having to have the particular equipment and do the right things. I understand that.
One of the questions was, is it a 2-pound can or 2-ounce can, from Robert? And yeah, I would suppose that the cost is so high per ounce, that would be kind of interesting that they sell it that low. But there was an advertisement in, I can't remember where, I saw it this past weekend that someone showed me, but it was listed with one of the bulk retailers, or big box retailers, showed that they were going to be a distributor of them. I can't remember which one it was. And then there's a question from Brian about, he works in a shop, they have multiple technicians, a dozen, and asked if all technicians have to have 609 certification. And I spoke over Don, so Don, pop in when Dave's done.
So again, starting January 1 of 2018, there's 2 reasons to have a Section 609 certification. The prevailing reason has always been that anybody that works on a motor vehicle air conditioning system for hire, that's the federal law wording, means you got to have 609. Okay, so if you make a living doing it, you got to have it. And your touching systems, you got to have it. Okay, now there's a second reason. Again, it was there before and then kind of went away when 12 faded away. Now when you go to buy refrigerant, you got to have it. You got to show that credential.
Dave, this is Don jumping in here. A couple things real quickly. You've touched on here, but we've had a number of people keep asking about the 609 certification, just kind of validate that right now it does not expire, so once they have it, it's good. And I guess the second thing is, for those who have lost their 609 card from ASE, how would they go about getting that? And then the last question, I think it comes up again, is, okay, a couple of guys logged in late here due to confusion. How would they watch this recording? If you could deal with those, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Don. So this webinar and all the other ones that we do, they're recorded, and then what we do is we load them to YouTube, and anybody that registered for this session, whether they attended or not, will receive a follow-up email with a link in it that'll give you the specific location to go and watch this after the fact.
Okay, and if they were certified or have the 609 certification from ASE, if they don't have the card anymore, how would they get that, please?
Right. So the other part of it is first thing I want to just say is, if it's been a good while, if you've taken a version of the program prior to 2015, I'd strongly urge you, instead of getting a duplicate credential, to go ahead and take the newest program, because it's $19 for the program altogether, which will include a new certificate, a new wallet card, and getting the newest credential, whereas just getting a duplicate credential on the old program is going to be $10. So it's just $9 more. You get the newest thing, and you're all set to go. But if you go to ASE.com, if you want a duplicate, if you did take a more recent one, you need a duplicate, you can go to ASE.com in the download form section. We have it there as far as duplicate credentials, and also at asecampus.com we have a form there. What else we got?
Dave, on the 609 credential, when they receive their credential, does it come with a smaller card that they can use when they're going to purchase 134, when they're asked to show the card to buy the 30-pound can?
Right, they get two pieces. They get it's kind of a quasi-laminated wallet card, and then they also get a certificate roughly 5 by 7 inches in size.
Okay, and then to Omar. Omar, again, Dave just mentioned how to go find this webinar. Dave will post this. It'll be available next week on YouTube, and you can search YouTube. Just type in ASE Campus and hit search. That'll bring you to the ASE channel there, ASE Campus channel, and then you can find the latest webinar. And then again, if you've taken a Section 609 and achieved your credential, it is still valid. Okay, so just very important to recognize that there is no expiration on them. Okay, and as for fines, that's an EPA relationship with the person that is violated, right? I mean, they're the ones that set the rules and then set the fines. And then if you don't, somebody asked, what if I go and I'm asked for my card? Well, if you're asked for your card when you're going to purchase 134, that's up to that person if they're going to allow you to purchase at that time of the transaction. And if you're asked for your card for something else, it really depends on what's going on. That's a very subjective question.
And I just want to mention real quickly, Dan, that the resources that are being shown on the screen right now are in the downloadable documents piece, so all of those are listed, so I don't have to hold them.
Hey, Dave, we lost you there. I stepped back and partway through you disappeared.
Okay, I apologize for that. So I just wanted to say that I posted the resources on the screen, but you don't need to write this down or take a picture of it or anything like that. It's in the download section in your little toolbar over on the side of your screen. It's one of the available resources there, along with some EPA fact sheets, things of that nature that might help you out. Any other cleanup questions, Dan, before we close the session out?
Just repeat again, for those that are looking for a reprint, they go to ASE.com, right? 609, find the reprints available. If you got it from Max, you contact Max, okay?
Right.
Very clear there. And then the other thing too is that manufacturer training does not meet the Section 608 or Section 609 regulations. There's only 2 players in the game, correct, Dave?
Other than manufacturer-specific programs.
But the manufacturer-specific programs, are those Section 608 and 609 compatible?
I don't know that they're both. I mean, I can really only speak namely for 609. I mean, some of the manufacturers and groups, training groups, do have their own dedicated 609 programs that are, meet the EPA approval.
Okay, so Phil, specifically to you at your training center, okay, if the HVAC training has 608 information on that certificate or in the program information, or 609 information on that, then you may meet the requirement. I think you're better off asking them than us, okay?
And everyone... Yeah, sorry, and for everyone's benefit too, one of the links that's in the resource section is if you go to www.epa.gov/MVAC, okay, there's a whole bunch of resources there, but there is a list of approved providers for Section 609. You're going to find ASE on that list, you're going to find MAX on that list, and you'll find several others, but that list is really the comprehensive, document that says whether it's met the 609 requirements that have, been issued by EPA.
And then the last thing I'd like to address is that requirement for presenting a Section 609 credential part of the current purchase requirements if I were to walk into my local parts distributor and buy a 30-pound container of 134 refrigerant?
Not today, it's not in effect.
Okay, and when will it be in effect?
January 1, 2018.
Okay, so that we're reinforcing that for those folks that are asking. Okay, 2018. So you got some time to get this thing organized if you don't have one already. A 609 already.
Now, operationally, if you go in on January 5th, 2018, and you go to buy a 30-pound cylinder of 134, and they don't ask you, well, then maybe they're not up to speed yet. But that's when the law goes into effect. What happens out there in the real world at that point, it's anybody's guess.